All right, they got it done.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Syracuse basketball took on Georgia Tech inside the Dome this evening, and they got the W, 62-55 for their first Power-5 conference win of the season. I'm Jackson Holzer. This is Locked On Syracuse, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And folks, this is a post-game reaction podcast. We're going to talk about how the Orange got the win against Georgia Tech 62-55. We're going to go over the critical plays that Syracuse made down the stretch in this one. They finally did it. Unlike so many previous games against Power-5 competition, they actually got it done and made the big plays they had to make. All right. We're also going to talk about how they played this game without Donnie Freeman. Yes, the 5-star true freshman, best Syracuse recruit since Carmelo Anthony, who's actually had a pretty solid year, all things considered. He did not play in this one with a right leg injury. But you know what? It didn't matter. And actually, the Orange might have gotten better on defense. So we'll talk about that in segment 2. And finally, at the end, we just all have to breathe a sigh of relief. Because Syracuse basketball is not going to go winless this season against Power-5 competition. Plenty of more to come here on Locked On Syracuse. And before we get to everything, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Win or lose, visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, so it just feels so good. I don't know why it feels good. I think it's because of all the pressure that this team has been on recently, because they have not been very good and they have dug themselves into this hole. And I really did not want to come on here and do another post-game reaction talking about another Syracuse basketball loss. So it does feel really good. And we could start from the very beginning of this game, because the Orange changed their lineup around. And it wasn't just, let's throw in Jair Davis, normally the backup 4, in for Donnie Freeman. Oh no. Coach Autry had another idea. He started J.J. Starling as the point guard with Chapa Moore as the 2 guard. So Jaquan Carlos was out of the starting lineup, and I think that was ultimately the right call. He also stuck with the starting 3 of going with Lucas Taylor instead of Chris Bell, and I think that's a formula that Syracuse should continue to use, because Chris Bell looks like a different human coming off the bench. Jair Davis was a 1-for-1 replacement for Donnie Freeman, and you had Eddie Lampkin, the usual starting center, in the lineup as well. And before we get to everything, Eddie Lampkin had a very weird game. I saw a lot of criticism, and then all of a sudden he would make a big play, and I would praise him, and then he would have another turnover or something. Eddie Lampkin is just a fascination. But anyway, back to recapping this game. I don't want to spend too long here on the first half, because the first half, quite frankly, was atrocious from both teams. Now, Syracuse basketball led 25-24 at the end of the first half, but both teams were not shooting the ball well. Syracuse at 37%, Georgia Tech at 30%. Both teams were turning the ball over a ton, but Syracuse was actually doing a better job at capitalizing off the turnovers in the first half, with Georgia Tech having a slight rebounding edge. And finally, this was the weirdest part of the whole half. Syracuse basketball did not trail at any point in the first 20 minutes. But their largest lead was only 6 points, and they only led by 1. Just really confusing. 25-24. I don't want to spend too much time on it. Honestly, you were better off turning on this game in the second half, because that's where things really got interesting. And both teams took turns trading blows. Both of them did. Syracuse would open up a lead. Georgia Tech would go on a run and open up a lead, as it usually goes in a tight game. And in a tight game in the second half, if you've been watching or listening to basketball long enough, you know that it's going to come down to the last couple of possessions. in order to decide who's going to win the game. And that's what this game kind of felt like. Unlike previous chances that the Orange have had, Texas, Texas Tech, Notre Dame, Wake Forest, Georgetown, Syracuse basketball was actually the team that made the big plays down the stretch. They finally did it. The Orange were leading this one 52-44 with 4 minutes to go in the game. But then it got a little hairy because I'm thinking to myself, when they're up by 8 points with 4 minutes to go, they better close. They better do this. I do not want to see Syracuse blow this one. Please don't. Luckily, they didn't, but it did get hairy. Because with 1:30 to go, Jair Davis gets blown by off the dribble. Georgia Tech hits a layup, and it's a 4-point game. That's not a lot with 1:30 to go. That's plenty of time. But then Syracuse basketball, as a team, it was a group effort, made the critical plays down the stretch. J.J. Starling hit a fadeaway jumper to make it a 6-point game with about a minute to go. And he used up most of the shot clock, which is what you're supposed to do when you have the lead late in a game. And he got himself a little bit free and hit the jumper. That's what Syracuse was missing down the stretch against a team like Georgetown and Wake Forest, a shot maker down the stretch. They did have J.J. Starling against Texas and Texas Tech, though. I want to point that out. But he hits that fadeaway. It's a 6-point game. But then Georgia Tech, they draw 1-1. To their credit, they actually hit free throws this time. They did not do well from the free throw line in this one at all. Actually, I could pull up the numbers. I can't actually pull it up on the screen, but I could tell you what they were. Georgia Tech was 3 of 11 at the free throw line. But down the stretch, they made both of their free throws, ironically. So it's back to a 4-point game with a minute to go. And I think one of the biggest plays of this game was on that ensuing possession. J.J. Starling drives to his right, and he kicks to the top of the key to an open Jair Davis. He's wide open. He could take a three-pointer if he wants. And let's be honest, with the Orange up 4 with a minute to go, if he makes that 3 and makes it a 7-point game, it's probably over. But here's the thing with Jair Davis. He's not a good free throw shooter, but he's not a good 3-point shooter. He's not. He actually, I believe, airballed a 3 in this one when he tried it from the corner. I don't want him taking 3s. And so what does Jair Davis do? He recognizes that, hey, he has all this space at the top of the key. He takes a couple of dribbles, drives inside, pulls up from 15 feet, and very calmly rattles home a jumper. He's so calm, cool, and poised under pressure. And to Georgia Tech's credit, they don't go away. Terry hits a 3. It's a 3-point game with 27.8 seconds left. And now it comes down to free throws. Jair Davis, that's the inbound to J.J. Starling. Starling is fouled, actually before I think the pass even got to him. And it's a 1-1 situation. Now, we have seen Syracuse in games this year, even in games that they have won, not convert late game 1-1s. Jaquan Carlos, I believe, against Youngstown State is the big example. Could have ended that game, I believe, in the first overtime. Instead, it came down to 2 overtimes. So JJ has a 1-1, and if he misses that first one, Georgia Tech can tie the game. But he makes both of the free throws. He made them. And then Syracuse gets a stop. They play good defense. They forced a tough 3-pointer from Baidongo. Chris Bell then gets fouled. Again, I believe it's a 1-1. 13 seconds left. And Chris Bell hits both free throws to give Syracuse the 7-point lead, which would hold true. 62-55. The Orange get it done over Georgia Tech by making the big plays down the stretch. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below on this game and whether or not you think that this could somehow turn around Syracuse's season. I don't necessarily think that, but it was nice that the Orange finally got a W against a Power-5 opponent. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below, because coming up, we are going to talk about how Syracuse played this game without one of its biggest stars. So stick with me here on Locked On Syracuse. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions or spending habits or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. For me, one of the best features is the subscription tracker. I've used it to cancel services I wasn't using anymore, and I've already saved a ton. Plus, with their goals feature, I've been able to automatically set aside money for my future. No more stressing about budgeting every month. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/locked-on today. That's rocketmoney.com/locked-on. rocketmoney.com/locked-on. The strength of Syracuse basketball has been and will continue to be its front court. And that's what we learned tonight against Georgia Tech. I'm Jackson Holzer. This is Locked On Syracuse, and the Orange got their first Power-5 victory of the season, 62-55 inside the Dome. We talked about how the Orange made the critical plays down the stretch, unlike previous chances to win Power-5 games like against Texas, Texas Tech, Notre Dame, Georgetown, Wake Forest. They hit the big shots. They got the big stop when they needed to, and they hit their free throws down the stretch to get the W. But Syracuse basketball did it without Donnie Freeman, one of the bright spots of the team. Donnie Freeman came into the season with a lot of hype. He was the highest rated Syracuse basketball recruit since Carmelo Anthony, and he has mostly lived up to it. Yes, he's had his freshman moments, and I think we would all like him to be better on defense, but he averages 13 points and 8 rebounds as a 5-star freshman. If I told you before the season he's going to average 13 and 8, I think most of you, if not all of you, would have signed up for that. But they didn't have him in this one. Now, fortunately, I actually checked Twitter right before I filmed this segment, and Coach Autry said, and I'm reading this from the Q Sports Talk Twitter page, that Donnie Freeman's right leg injury, which is why he did not play tonight and he was in a boot, Autry says it's day-to-day and that the injury occurred against Florida State. So we'll see whether or not if he plays on Saturday against Boston College, but it appears that it's not a severe injury, at least according to Adrian Autry. It's just day-to-day. So thank goodness on that. But the reason why I let off this segment talking about how the front court really is the strength is because we saw how the Orange were able to adjust without Donnie Freeman in the lineup. When J.J. Starling was not in the lineup, they could not adjust. That I will agree with you on. I didn't think not having J.J. Starling would solve, or I didn't think it was all the problems for Syracuse basketball during that stretch. And we obviously saw when he came back against Florida State, it did not matter having Starling in the lineup. But without Starling, the backcourt is very thin. It is. Who's the second best player in the backcourt for Syracuse? Chapa's not really doing anything, even though he was in the starting lineup. Jaquan Carlos is now out of the starting lineup. Lucas Taylor is actually the starting 3, so he's not in the backcourt anymore. You want to say Kyle Cuff is the second best player in the backcourt for Syracuse, aside from J.J. Starling? Kyle Cuff, who only played 4 minutes in this one. Elijah Moore somehow played 17 for what it's worth. But in the front court without Donnie Freeman, they were okay. They were fine. And here's why. Number one, they had to rely on Eddie Lampkin more. And Eddie Lampkin had a very confusing game. Eddie Lampkin had 10 points and 12 rebounds, but if you check Twitter at times, you would think that he had 0 points, 0 rebounds, 40 minutes, and he basically had a Tony Snell game. Now, granted, he had 4 turnovers. It was one of those games for him where he would make he would make a big play, and then on the next possession, he would turn the ball over. He had one really bad turnover in the second half where he telegraphed the pass to J.J. Starling. It got picked off, and it led to a dunk for Georgia Tech. But they have to rely on him without Donnie Freeman. Hopefully, he'll be back for Boston College, but if not, they need him, and he played the second most minutes on the team with 35. Eddie Lampkin normally averages around 26 to 27 minutes. So he has to play more, but he's capable of playing more. You have Jair Davis, 8 points, 9 rebounds, but he had to play 32 minutes. But I think he's capable of playing 32 minutes just in spurts. You can't ask Jair Davis long-term to play over 30 minutes, but in one game at home against Georgia Tech, it's fine. And if needed on Saturday, if he needs to play 30-plus minutes against Boston College, I think he can do that. Boston College is not a very good team. I think he could. So the strength of the team still remains the front court because they have adequate replacements for a guy like Donnie Freeman. Unlike when J.J. Starling was out for Syracuse. Furthermore, we saw more depth. Peter Mastervich, once again, energy and effort is the name of the game with Peter Mastervich. That's what it is. I honestly wish that every single player on the team played with his energy and played with his effort, because if they did, I feel like Syracuse would be in a better position than what they are in right now. In this one, Peter Mastervich had no points, but he had 6 rebounds. I thought he played quality defense at times. The issue with Peter Mastervich is he only played 12 minutes, but that's because he gets in foul trouble. So that's something he's got to work on going forward, is playing good defense, but not fouling. He had 4 fouls in 12 minutes. So I know myself and plenty of others, we like to question Adrian Autry and his lineups and how confusing they can be at times. Well, he's got a perfectly valid reason for why Mastervich only played 12 minutes. He had 4 fouls. But overall, his energy, his effort, when he tries on defense, which he usually does, but when he can convert on defense as well and be good, he's a pretty effective player off the bench. And so therefore, when you have the combination of Davis and you have the combination of Davis and Lampkin and Mastervich and Chris Bell finally going a little bit off the bench, it can help mitigate the loss of Donnie Freeman in the short term, which, thank goodness, is the short term. Unlike when J.J. Starling was not in the lineup, there really wasn't anyone behind him who can come close to replacing him. So that's what it was like playing without Donnie Freeman. I also think at times in this game, Syracuse was better off defensively. They were certainly better off defensively at times because Donnie Freeman's not a great defender. And I think Jair Davis is slightly better on defense. Not saying that's the only reason why Georgia Tech only scored 55 points, but it's certainly a reason. So that's something to keep in mind going forward. How Syracuse can adjust when one of its front court players is missing versus when one of its backcourt players is missing. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. It certainly appears that when Syracuse is missing a front court player, they're fine. But when they're missing someone in the backcourt, particularly J.J. Starling, they are royally screwed. And screwed is a euphemism for a different word, but I feel like making money on this podcast, so I will not say it. All right? Now, coming up, let's all breathe a sigh of relief because Syracuse basketball won a Power-5 conference game. Has this been the year that any of us would have wanted? Of course not. Syracuse basketball, in my opinion, is still not a very good team. And just because they beat Georgia Tech at home 62-55, that is not going to change my opinion. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to celebrate and that I am not going to feel good about this. Because finally they get a Power-5 win. They started the year 0-8 in the Power-5. 0-8. 0-3 in the ACC, which is not even a very good league. But they won't go winless. And this was a big game for a couple of reasons. Number one, just to take the heat off the team. Have they deserved the heat? Yes, they have not been playing well. But at least for now, I can't say anything too bad about them because they won. Same with anyone else. So at least it gets the pressure a little bit off. Just for a couple of days. It stood on that. But number two, let's talk a little bit more tangible. We all know that the NCAA tournament, it's not going to happen. They're not going to get selected for an at-large bid. Sad to say, but it's true. However, I think we'd all want them to make the ACC tournament, right? Don't you want to see more basketball games? I do. I want to see them at least make the tournament because, as I said earlier, this is not pro sports when you could tank for the number one pick. There is no tanking. So you want your team to win as much as they can, right? So tangibly speaking, this was actually a big W for Syracuse in terms of getting into the ACC tournament because, look, 15 of the 18 are ultimately going to make it. But there are some games on the schedule that Syracuse basketball is going to have to win in order to get into the ACC tournament. And look, they did themselves no favors by starting the conference 0-3. Before today, they were on the outside looking in. And granted, it's early, but still, you're on the outside looking in. And you got to figure that, barring some miracle, there are plenty of teams that they're going to lose to in the ACC. But they had to beat a team like Georgia Tech, who comes into the game tonight about 140 in the net rankings. That's a team that's beatable. That is a team that is certainly beatable. And in order to make it into the ACC tournament, you're going to have to beat the beatable teams in the ACC. I'm actually going to look up Georgia Tech's net ranking right now just to get an accurate statement for you all. And they were exactly 140 heading into the night. They were 140 and Syracuse was in the 160 range. You're at home. So that's a good W from that perspective. Okay. They also have Boston College coming up on Saturday. Saturday at 3:00 Eastern. Boston College is not a good team. They are one of the few teams in the ACC that's lower rated than Syracuse in the net rankings. If the Orange are going to want to make the ACC tournament, that's another game that they're going to have to win. Because you got to start stacking the W's. If you can beat Georgia Tech and you can beat Boston College, well, now you're at 2. How many more do you realistically need to get into the top 15? Probably not too many. But teams like Georgia Tech and teams like Boston College, and later when they play Miami on February 11th, when they play Boston College at home again, those are games that Syracuse is going to have to win to make the ACC tournament. So not only was this game important for just the overall vibes of the team and just to make us all feel good again, at least for just a moment, but also, look, they're in a race to make the conference tournament because they're not very good right now. They're going to have to beat the other bottom feeders. They're going to have to beat Georgia Tech. They're going to have to beat Boston College coming up. They're going to have to beat Miami and Virginia Tech in order to get in there. And who knows, if they can pull off an upset, great. But you probably don't need to pull off an upset if you can just sweep all those games. And this was a good start in that quest, beating Georgia Tech 62-55 inside the Dome. I'm Jackson Holzer. This is Locked On Syracuse. And thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On ACC podcast. Alex Dono and Kenton Gibbs, they keep it real and bring you the truth about where your favorite ACC team stands within the conference. You can find Locked On ACC on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. As far as what is coming up on the podcast, I have purposely left tomorrow open. For now, this full podcast will count as the Wednesday podcast, okay? So the next basketball game coming up, I mentioned, is Saturday at Boston College at 3 p.m. Eastern. There will be a full post-game reaction podcast. I also probably will post a full podcast on Thursday. And of course, there's Poll Friday on Friday, which the question for this week was, how do you feel about Syracuse football right now in the transfer portal because according to 24/7 Sports, they are second worst in the ACC right now. And actually, at the time of this recording, one of the cornerbacks that they were targeting committed to Wake Forest just now. So, I believe his name is Sasha Garcia was the guy they were going after. Supposed to visit Syracuse, but not anymore. Are you worried? Are you not? Are you panicked? That's coming up on Friday. All right, I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day. If you like this video, click that like button. If you really liked it, subscribe to the channel, turn on those notifications so you know right away when I am dropping the next podcast, and I will see you guys all again very soon.